The chandelier lights cascaded like a cascade of captured stars across the vaulted ceiling of Grant Manor, where the air hummed with the sophisticated murmur of elite conversations and the delicate clink of crystal glasses toasting to fortunes built on innovation and ambition. It was the 10th anniversary gala for Grant Ventures, a sprawling affair in the opulent estate on the outskirts of Silicon Valley, where tech moguls in tailored tuxedos mingled with venture capitalists draped in designer gowns, their laughter a symphony of self-assured success under the watchful eyes of security personnel stationed like silent sentinels at every archway. Amid this glittering tableau of wealth and whispers, Lena Hayes glided through the throng with the practiced grace of invisibility, her slate-gray apron starched to perfection, her dark curls pinned back in a neat bun that spoke of quiet efficiency rather than ostentation. At 35, with skin the warm hue of polished mahogany and eyes like polished obsidian that missed nothing, Lena had mastered the art of being unseen, a skill honed not in the service industry, but in the shadowed corridors of global intrigue where one wrong glance could unravel years of covert work. 2 years prior, she had walked away from the Central Intelligence Agency, trading encrypted briefings and midnight extractions for the rhythmic simplicity of polishing silverware and arranging floral centerpieces, a deliberate retreat from the ghosts that haunted her waking hours. Those ghosts wore the face of Marcus Hale, no relation to the man whose empire she would soon dismantle her partner in a botched operation in the labyrinthine markets of Bogotá, where a tip-off gone awry had left him bleeding out in a rain-slicked alley, his last words a fading murmur of, "Finish it, Lena, for the ones who can't." The scar on her right forearm, a jagged reminder of that night, itched faintly under her sleeve as she balanced a silver tray laden with flutes of vintage champagne, weaving past clusters of guests who barely registered her presence, their eyes sliding over her as if she were part of the decor, just another fixture in Elias Grant's meticulously curated world of excess. Elias Grant himself commanded the center of the grand ballroom, a man of 48 with salt and pepper hair swept back in a style that suggested effortless control, his broad shoulders filling out a bespoke Tom Ford suit, as he regaled a circle of admirers with tales of his latest algorithmic breakthrough, a predictive model that had turned whispers of market trends into billions overnight. Grant was the archetype of the self-made titan, risen from the gritty tenements of the Bronx through sheer intellect and unyielding drive, his company a beacon for disruptors who dreamed of reshaping economies with lines of code. He sipped his scotch neat, the amber liquid catching the light as he gestured animatedly, oblivious to the undercurrents of envy and calculation rippling through his audience. To him, Lena was simply the reliable help, hired through his estate manager for her impeccable references and unassuming demeanor, a woman who ensured the silver gleamed and the linen stayed crisp without ever intruding on the conversations that mattered. She had served him breakfast in the sun-drenched solarium, folded his monogrammed towels with geometric precision, and listened in silence to his occasional monologues about the burdens of leadership, all while harboring secrets that could topple governments. Tonight, as she circled the periphery, refilling glasses with a nod and a murmured, "Excuse me, ma'am," her senses sharpened instinctively, a vestige of training that never truly faded. It began with a subtle dissonance, a fractional pause in the jazz quartet saxophone solo, a guest's laughter cutting off mid-note, as if swallowed by an unseen tide. Lena's tray steadied in her grip, the champagne bubbles rising undisturbed, but her pulse quickened to a metronomic rhythm, years of fieldwork awakening like a dormant sentinel. She scanned the room without turning her head, her gaze flicking to the secondary entrance from the staff corridor, where shadows elongated unnaturally under the recessed lighting. 4 figures emerged, not with the languid stroll of late arrivals, but with the coiled precision of predators staking a claim. Men in ill-fitting black suits that hung loose at the seams, their postures betraying military echoes, shoulders squared, eyes darting in a clockwise sweep of exits and vantage points, hands hovering near concealed bulges at their hips, no ties, no polished shoes clicking against the marble. These were interlopers, their movements too synchronized for coincidence, too devoid of social feint for guests. Lena's mind catalogued them in seconds. The leader, broad-shouldered with a telltale limp favoring his left knee, likely from an old injury. The second, fidgeting with his cuff as if adjusting a hidden comms device, the others flanking like wings in formation. Her breath remained even, a deliberate anchor against the adrenaline surge, as she set her tray on a nearby console table, fingers brushing the concealed fold in her apron where a compact multi-tool disguised as a seam ripper rested like an old friend. The room's harmony shattered in an instant, the ornate double doors to the foyer bursting inward with a force that rattled the crystal pendants overhead. Screams erupted like shattering glass as 4 masked intruders stormed the threshold, their faces obscured by balaclavas that did little to muffle the barked commands slicing through the air. "Everyone down. Hands where we can see them now." The leader leveled a compact pistol skyward, firing a single suppressed round into the vaulted ceiling. The muffled crack echoed like thunder in a bottle, sending a spray of plaster dust and a single dangling shard of chandelier crystal plummeting to the floor amid gasps and the clatter of abandoned heels. Panic rippled outward in waves, guests diving behind velvet settees or scrambling toward the French doors leading to the manicured gardens, their finery tangling in a chaotic ballet of self-preservation. A woman in emerald silk clutched her pearl necklace as if it were a talisman, her escort shielding her with arms that trembled despite his boardroom bravado. An investor toppled a side table in his haste, spilling caviar onto the Persian rug in dark, glistening rivulets. Elias Grant whirled from his circle of sycophants, his scotch splashing across his cuff as he thrust a protective arm toward the cluster, bellowing into his earpiece. "Security breach at the main entrance! Lock it down." But his voice cracked under the strain, the color draining from his face as he glimpsed the intruders fanning out with ruthless efficiency. One vaulting onto the low stage to wrench the microphone from the startled vocalist, another hurling burlap sacks toward the cowering crowd with orders to empty your pockets, jewelry, watches, cash, all of it. The air thickened with the acrid tang of fierce sweat and spilled perfume, the jazz band's frantic scramble to silence their instruments amplifying the intruder's dominance. Lena, positioned near the periphery by the grand piano, did not flinch. Instead, she dropped to one knee in a fluid motion that mimicked the guest's capitulation, her eyes locking onto the nearest assailant, a wiry figure advancing toward the bar, his weapon trained on a young server who had frozen mid-pour, a half-filled flute trembling in her grasp. He was the weak link, Lena assessed instantly. Right-handed grip too loose on the pistol, a subtle sway in his stance suggesting overconfidence or impairment, and the faint glint of a non-standard holster peeking from his jacket likely procured from the gray market, not agency issue. These were not amateurs, but neither were they elite. Their coordination screamed rehearsal, yet the absence of earpieces or encrypted chatter hinted at a rushed operation, perhaps a diversion for something deeper. Grant's security detail, 6 ex-military contractors in discreet earpieces finally mobilized, emerging from alcoves with drawn Glocks. But the intruders were steps ahead, the leader pivoting with a shout. "One wrong move, and your boss gets the first souvenir." His barrel swiveled toward Grant, who raised his hands instinctively, the glass slipping from his fingers to shatter at his feet in a spray of amber shards. The room held its collective breath, a tableau of frozen terror, a tech heiress sobbing into her companion's lapel, a venture capitalist fumbling with his Rolex as if it burned his wrist, the air electric with the unspoken calculus of compliance versus catastrophe. Lena's mind raced through protocols long archived the CIA's crisis cascade. Assess threats, identify assets, execute containment without escalation. She could not stand idle. The young server's wide-eyed plea mirrored too closely Marcus's final gaze, a silent accusation of inaction. Rising slowly, tray reclaimed as camouflage, Lena approached the bar with measured steps, her voice cutting through the din with disarming calm. "Sir, perhaps a drink to steady the nerves? We have an excellent reserve scotch. Compliments of Mr. Grant." The intruder whirled, his pistol snapping up to hover inches from her sternum, the server's gasp a sharp intake behind the counter. "Shut your mouth, lady. Get on the floor or join the party early." His tone was laced with bravado. But Lena caught the flicker of micro-hesitation in his eyes, the barrel dipping a fraction as if he sensed her unflappable poise amid the pandemonium. Whispers slithered through the crowd. "Is she crazy? That maid's going to get herself hurt." Grant, from across the room, locked eyes with her for the first time that evening, not as employer to employee, but as witness to an enigma unfolding. He mouthed a frantic no, but Lena's focus narrowed to the intruder's wrist, the subtle tremor betraying adrenaline overload. In a blur that defied the chaos, Lena pivoted the tray upward in a precise arc, its edge connecting with the man's forearm like a battering ram honed by muscle memory from countless sparring sessions in Langley basements. The impact reverberated up her arms, the pistol discharging harmlessly into the ornate bar top, splintering mahogany and sending a geyser of bourbon skyward. The man staggered, shock widening his eyes beneath the mask, but Lena was already closing the gap, her knee driving forward in a controlled strike to his midsection, not to maim, but to disrupt, forcing the air from his lungs in a whoosh that dropped him to his knees. She followed with an open palm thrust to his temple, a technique drilled into her during evasion training, precise enough to stun without permanent harm. He crumpled sideways, the balaclava slipping to reveal a sweat-slicked face contorted in disbelief. The room erupted anew, screams peaking as the remaining intruders spun toward the commotion, their weapons sweeping the space like scythes. "What the take her down," the leader bellowed, his shot grazing the air where Lena had been a heartbeat prior, embedding in the piano's lacquered lid with a resonant twang. But she was motion incarnate, rolling behind an overturned chaise lounge, her breath steady as she assessed. 3 active threats, security converging from the east wing, civilians scattering like leaves in a gale. Grant's guards opened fire in controlled bursts, pinning 2 intruders behind a toppled ice sculpture that melted in rivulets across the floor. But the leader broke toward the stage, grabbing a hostage, a silver-haired philanthropist whose cry pierced the fray. Lena surged from cover, her path a zigzag through the detritus of disrupted elegance. Shattered stemware crunching underfoot, a discarded Hermes clutch spilling lipstick tubes like fallen soldiers. She vaulted onto a banquet table, the linen runner billowing like a sail as she launched herself at the intruder's back, her arms locking around his neck in a modified sleeper hold adapted from restraint protocols, enough pressure to choke off resistance without injury. He bucked wildly, elbow jabbing backward, but Lena twisted with his momentum, using his weight to propel them both crashing into the velvet drapes, which tore free in a cascade of gold tassels. The pistol clattered away, skittering under a settee, and as he clawed at her grip, she whispered fiercely into his ear, "Yield, and no one else gets hurt." He went limp, consciousness fleeing under the expert application of leverage points she had perfected in simulations far deadlier than this. The final intruder, cornered near the garden doors by Grant's converging team, hesitated a fatal pause as Lena disentangled herself and hurled a discarded champagne bottle like a discus, its base connecting with his knee in a crack that buckled him forward. Security swarmed, zip ties snapping into place as sirens wailed in the distance, the first responders' lights painting the manor's facade in staccato blue and red. The ballroom fell into a stunned hush, the air heavy with the scent of spilled libations and cordite residue, guests rising shakily to cluster in knots of wide-eyed recounting. Lena straightened her apron with deliberate calm, brushing dust from her sleeve as if she had merely righted a toppled vase, her chest rising and falling in measured rhythm. Elias Grant pushed through the throng, his face a mask of awe and residual terror, 2 guards flanking him like bookends. He reached her, clasping her shoulders with hands that trembled despite his composure. "Lena, what in the world just happened? You took them down like it was nothing. Who are you, really?" His voice was a raw whisper, the vulnerability cracking the facade of the unflappable CEO. She met his gaze steadily, the weight of unspoken histories pressing at the edges of her resolve. Around them, murmurs swelled. "Did you see that? The maid just saved us all. She's no ordinary staff, look at how she moved." A detective, arriving with the rush of uniforms, jotted notes while eyeing her with professional curiosity, but Lena waved off the preliminaries, insisting on aiding the shaken server first fetching water, a blanket, a reassuring touch that grounded the girl amid the whirlwind. Later, as the authorities cordoned off the scene and guests filtered out into the dawn-kissed driveway, their limousines idling like obedient beasts, Grant led Lena to the sanctuary of his private study, a wood-paneled haven lined with first editions and a roaring hearth that cast flickering shadows across leather-bound tomes on quantum computing and Renaissance art. He poured 2 measures of aged bourbon from a crystal decanter, the liquid glugging softly into heavy tumblers, and handed one to her without ceremony. "Sit, please. And tell me, because I need to know, how does a woman who dusts my bookshelves disarm 4 armed men without breaking a sweat?" Lena accepted the glass, the warmth seeping through her palm as she sank into a wingback chair. the fire's glow illuminating the faint scar on her arm like a map of forgotten battles. She sipped, the burn a familiar companion from stakeouts in distant capitals, and began to unravel the threadbare veil of her anonymity. I wasn't always here, Mr. Grant. Before the manor, before the aprons and the schedules, I was with the CIA undercover operations, mostly in high-risk zones where intel was currency and lives were the collateral. Places like the souks of Marrakech or the back alleys of São Paulo, extracting assets or disrupting networks that preyed on the vulnerable. Her voice remained even, but her eyes drifted to the flames, where embers danced like the muzzle flashes of that fateful night in Colombia. Marcus was my partner, sharp as a blade, with a laugh that could diffuse a room full of tension. We were pulling a defector from a cartel safehouse when it went sideways. Bad intel, a double cross from someone higher up the chain. He covered my exit, bought me time with everything he had. I got out. He didn't. The agency called it acceptable losses, handed me a commendation and a pension I never cashed. I left because I couldn't stomach the machine anymore, the way it chews up the good ones and spits out justifications. Grant listened without interruption, his bourbon untouched as he leaned forward, elbows on knees, the firelight etching lines of empathy into his features. He had built an empire on calculated risks, but this was a calculus of the soul, one that resonated with his own shadowed ascent, the deals cut in smoke-filled rooms, the alliances forged with men whose morals bent like reeds in the wind. That explains the calm, he said softly, the way you read the room like a chessboard. Those men tonight, they weren't random, were they? The precision, the sacks for valuables, it felt staged. Lena nodded, pulling a small drive from her apron pocket, the one extracted from the leader's boot during the scuffle, its matte surface cool against her fingertips. She slotted it into Grant's sleek laptop on the desk, the screen blooming to life with encrypted files that decrypted under her deft password entry, ledgers of offshore transfers, coded references to art shipments, masking something far grimmer, timestamps aligning with recent anomalies in Grant Ventures' subsidiary accounts. Not random at all. This is a money laundering op, using your events as covers high-profile gatherings where cash flows unchecked and donations vanish into the ether. Look here. Transfers to shell companies in the Caymans, funneled through what looks like art auctions. Someone's leveraging your name for legitimacy. Grant's face paled as he scrolled, the bourbon finally finding his lips in a long, fortifying pull. God, Victor Hale. We were partners once, back when I was scraping by on angel investments. He handled the international side galleries, auctions, that world of veiled wealth. We split acrimoniously over a deal in Asia. He accused me of undercutting him. If he's behind this... His voice trailed, the implications crashing like waves, scandals that could crater stock prices, lawsuits that would bleed the company dry, a legacy tarnished by association. Lena closed the laptop with a soft click, the study's fire crackling as if underscoring the gravity. She had vowed silence after Marcus, a life of quiet atonement in the margins. But the drive's data echoed too closely the cartels she had once dismantled, the human cost buried in balance sheets. I can walk away, she offered, though the words tasted hollow. Hand this to the authorities. Let them handle it. But if Hale's as connected as these files suggest, he'll bury it, or worse, spin it back on you. Grant set his glass down, rising to pace the Persian rug, his silhouette elongated by the hearth's glow. No, you've already risked everything tonight. I won't let you vanish into the woodwork while my mess explodes. Help me unravel this, Lena. Not as staff, as an equal. Resources, access, whatever you need. She studied him, searching for the opportunism that often masked sincerity in men of his stature, but found only raw determination, a mirror to her own unyielding core. The ghosts of Bogota stirred, Marcus's voice a faint echo. For the ones who can't. With a nod that sealed an unspoken pact, she extended her hand. All right. But we do it clean, no shortcuts, no shadows. Hale thinks he's untouchable. We'll prove him wrong. One thread at a time. As dawn's first light filtered through the study's leaded windows, painting the room in hues of rose and gold, Grant Manor slumbered under a fragile peace, its halls still scented with the faint perfume of disruption. Yet in that quiet interlude, alliances forged in fire took root. and Lena Hayes, once a specter in service, emerged as the unyielding force poised to illuminate the darkness encroaching on empires built on fragile facades. The city beyond the estate walls stirred awake, oblivious to the reckoning brewing within, where a single act of composure had ignited a chain reaction destined to ripple across boardrooms and back alleys alike, challenging the veil of invincibility that cloaked the world's hidden predators. And as Lena stepped into the corridor, her apron exchanged for a borrowed jacket from Grant's closet, she felt the familiar weight of purpose settle like an old ally, not a burden, but a beacon guiding her back into the fray she had once fled. The gala's echoes lingered in the marble halls, a prelude to symphonies yet unwritten, where justice, long deferred, would finally claim its crescendo. The neon haze of New York City's underbelly pulsed like a living vein through the labyrinthine streets of Hell's Kitchen, where the glow from dive bars and shuttered warehouses bled into the night sky, casting elongated shadows that danced with the rhythm of distant sirens and the low thrum of bass from hidden speakeasies. 2 days after the chaos at Grant Manor had faded into a flurry of police reports and non-disclosure agreements signed in the dim light of dawn, Lena Hayes found herself behind the wheel of a nondescript black sedan, its engine purring softly as she navigated the rain-slicked avenues toward the pulsing heart of Club Eclipse, a subterranean haven for those who traded in whispers and wire transfers rather than spotlights and stock options. The wipers swept arcs of moisture from the windshield, mirroring the methodical way Lena had spent her intervening hours dissecting the USB drive's digital entrails, encrypted ledgers revealing a spiderweb of offshore accounts, each thread tracing back to shell entities masquerading as legitimate art consultancies, their transactions blooming like illicit flowers in the fertile soil of anonymous banking havens from Zurich to the Seychelles. Elias Grant sat in the passenger seat, his usual air of boardroom command tempered by the unfamiliar grit of the endeavor. He had shed his silk tie for a faded hoodie scavenged from his estate's lost and found, but the subtle gleam of his Rolex quickly concealed under a sleeve betrayed his origins, a beacon in the gloom that Lena had already chided him about twice. "Lose the watch if you want to blend," she had said earlier that evening over takeout Thai from a corner spot, her tone light but edged with the precision of someone who had once evaded surveillance teams in monsoon-drenched Manila alleys. Grant had complied with a wry chuckle, slipping the timepiece into his pocket, but the gesture felt like shedding a layer of his identity, a vulnerability he hadn't anticipated when extending his impulsive alliance to the woman who had upended his gala with the grace of a shadow slipping through moonlight. Their destination loomed as a nondescript steel door recessed into a graffiti-scarred brick facade, flanked by overflowing dumpsters that reeked of yesterday's regrets and tomorrow's schemes. A faded sign above read, "Eclipse Imports," a euphemism for the velvet-roped descent into a world where fortunes flipped on the turn of a card or the nod of a broker. Lena parked in a shadowed loading zone, killing the lights and scanning the mirrors for tails, a habit etched into her sinews from years of operational tradecraft, where a single overlooked reflection could spell the difference between extraction and erasure. "Stay close, speak only if spoken to, and let me lead the dance," she instructed Grant as they stepped into the drizzle, her black leather jacket zipped against the chill, boots silent on the puddles that mirrored the fractured neon above. He nodded, the bourbon from their strategy session still lingering on his breath, a faint warmth against the night's encroaching bite. For a man accustomed to summoning executives with a single email, this plunge into the visceral unknown stirred a cocktail of exhilaration and unease, his mind replaying the drive's revelations transfers totaling millions, routed through his company's innocuous event planning subsidiary, a ghost in the machine he had never audited closely enough. The door yielded to Lena's murmured passphrase "Shadow Fox" at 7, delivered to a bouncer whose eyes appraised them like commodities on a ledger, his massive frame shifting aside with a grunt that unlocked the stairwell's subterranean pulse. Descending into Eclipse felt like stepping through a membrane into another ecosystem. The air thickened with the haze of premium cigars and synthetic fog from the DJ booth, walls lined with velvet booths where deals were sealed over chilled vials of single malt and stacks of crisp hundreds. The main floor sprawled like a cavernous chessboard, roulette wheels spinning under strobing lights that painted faces in fleeting masks of greed and glee, blackjack dealers shuffling decks with the sleight of practiced illusionists, and in the shadowed alcoves, figures huddled over tablets, their screens flickering with cryptocurrency tickers and encrypted chat logs that could fund revolutions or ruin lives with equal indifference. Lena wove through the crowd with the unhurried poise of someone who belonged nowhere yet navigated everywhere, her senses attuned to the room's undercurrents, the subtle shift in a patron's posture when a high roller entered, the coded glances between waitstaff who doubled as lookouts, the faint electronic whine of jammers disrupting cell signals for privacy's sake. Grant trailed a step behind, his shoulders tense under the hoodie's cowl, the cacophony assaulting his senses, a croupier's call slicing through laughter, the clatter of chips like rain on tin, the undercurrent of desperation in a loser's hurried wager. This place, it's like a parallel economy, he murmured, close enough for her to hear over the din, his voice laced with the awe of a newcomer peering behind the curtain of his own industry's underbelly. Lena glanced back, her obsidian eyes catching his with a flicker of amusement tempered by caution. It's the shadow economy, Mr. Grant, the one that funds the light shows you host. Every gala, every auction, it's a vein they tap, but tonight, we're not bleeding, we're cauterizing. She steered them toward the bar, a curved slab of obsidian veined with LED strips that pulsed in sync with the baseline, ordering 2 whiskeys neat from a bartender whose tattooed arms flexed like coiled springs. As the drinks arrived, amber liquid swirling in lowball glasses, she scanned the periphery, her gaze locking onto their target. Jax Harlan, a mid-level fixer with a salt and pepper goatee and a penchant for gold pinky rings that screamed mid-tier ambition. He lounged in a corner booth, nursing a martini while tapping furiously on a burner phone. His companion, a sharp-featured woman in a crimson sheath who scanned the room with the wariness of someone who knew too many exits by heart. Approaching with the casual drift of casual patrons, Lena slid into the booth's opposite curve, Grant settling beside her with the stiffness of a man negotiating a merger rather than infiltrating a den of whispers. Jax Harlan? Word on the wire is, you're the man for offshore curiosities art that travels light and lands heavy. Lena opened. Her tone, a velvet hook laced with insider lingo, gleaned from the USB's footnotes, sliding a fabricated chit across the table that mimicked a high-end auction invite. Jax's eyes narrowed, flicking from the chit to her face, then to Grant's concealed features, a predator assessing bait. And you're, he drawled, his voice gravel from years of late nights and filtered smokes, leaning back to signal his companion to fade into the crowd. Consultants, Lena replied smoothly, sipping her whiskey to buy a beat, the burn grounding her as she gauged his tells, the micro-twitch of his ring finger, the way his gaze darted to the bar's security mirror, with a mutual interest in a certain Cayman conduit. We've got a drive full of echoes from a recent gathering, transfers that don't match the manifest. She nudged the duplicate USB toward him, its surface matte and unassuming, coated with just enough redacted data to peek without poisoning. Jax pocketed it with a slight that spoke of practiced discretion, his expression shifting from suspicion to calculation as he processed the implications. Gathering, huh? Sounds like the Grand Bash fancy footwork for a smash and grab. All right, consultants, follow me. But if this is a setup, Eclipse has ways of handling pests. Grant shifted uncomfortably as they rose, the booth's vinyl sighing in relief, his mind racing with the ethical tightrope they walked, exposing shadows that might illuminate his own oversights, the dormant audits he had deferred in pursuit of growth metrics. The private lounge Jax led them to was a cocoon of opulence amid the club's grit, walls paneled in burled walnut, a low table strewn with crystal decanters and a sleek terminal humming with encrypted feeds, the air scented with aged leather and the faint ozone of high-stakes electronics. He gestured to the tufted armchairs, pouring fresh measures from a sideboard before sinking into his own seat. The woman's absence, a calculated void that amplified the intimacy. Spill it, Jax prompted, activating the drive with a flourish that belied his wariness. The screen blooming with columnar arrays of account numbers and velocity reports that painted a damning mosaic. Grant leaned in, his tech founder's eye decoding the patterns faster than Lena could narrate. These aren't random, see the routing through Hale galleries? Victor Hale, my old partner. We built the international arm together, but he went rogue after a fallout over expansion ethics. If he's laundering through my events, his voice trailed, the weight of complicity settling like lead in his gut, a mirror to the moral ambiguities he had rationalized in startup days, equity trades that skirted regulations, partnerships with gray area financiers who promised scale at any cost. Jax whistled low, scrolling deeper to reveal layered obfuscations. Art valuations inflated to mask human cargo manifests disguised as cultural repatriations, funds siphoned to European ports where shipments vanished into trafficking webs. Hale's no small fish, Jax confirmed, his goatee twitching with a grim smile. He runs the gallery circuit like a syndicate auctions where a Matisse discovery covers a ledger of lives in transit. Your name's the perfect blind. Who questions a tech philanthropist's gala donations? But poking this hornet's nest. Hale's got reach cops on payroll, hackers who make your Silicon Valley wet dreams look like child's play. Before Grant could probe further, the lounge's outer door hissed open on pneumatic hinges, admitting 3 figures in unremarkable gray suits that screamed federal more than freelance. Broad-shouldered enforcers with earpieces coiling like serpents down their collars, their postures radiating the coiled menace of hired resolve. "Harlan, you slimy weasel, hand over the drive and the suits," the lead barked, his palm engulfing a Beretta as his companions fanned out, blocking the single exit with the inevitability of a closing vice. Jax bolted upright, fumbling for a concealed panel under the table, but Lena was a fraction ahead, her chair toppling backward as she surged into motion not with the explosive fury of the Manor's melee, but with the surgical redirection of a judo master turning force against itself. She sidestepped the first lunging grab, her forearm hooking his wrist in a fluid lock that twisted his momentum into a pivot, slamming him into the walnut credenza with a crash of shattering decanters and splintering wood. Glass shards glittered like fallen stars across the carpet as the second advanced, but Grant, emboldened by the adrenaline spiking through his veins, swept a brass lamp from the sideboard, its weighted base connecting with the man's knee in a dull thud that buckled him with a yelp. "Run now," Lena commanded, yanking Jax toward the rear service hatch she had clocked upon entry, her free hand palming a fire extinguisher from the wall as improvised cover, discharging a billowing cloud of foam that choked the air and blinded the third pursuer mid-stride. The lounge devolved into a maelstrom of flailing limbs and muffled curses, the terminal's screen flickering erratically as Jax smashed his fist into an emergency purge button, the drive's data self-erasing in a cascade of digital ash. They burst into the club's service corridor, a vein of fluorescent harshness lined with humming freezers and stacked crates of contraband-labeled imports, hearts pounding in unison as shouts echoed from the lounge behind, the enforcer's recovery swift and unforgiving. Lena shoved Jax ahead, Grant bringing up the rear with a scavenged chair leg clutched like a talisman, the trio's footfalls a staccato rhythm on the grated flooring that vibrated through their souls. "Elevator, end of the hall," Jax gasped, his earlier composure fracturing under the raw edge of survival, leading them to a freight lift whose doors groaned open on rusted tracks. As they piled in, Lena jammed the close button, the mechanism grinding shut just as a hail of restrained gunfire suppressed pops muffled by the club's thumping bass chipped the frame, sparks dancing like fireflies in the narrowing gap. The descent was a vertigo of creaking cables and labored breaths, the confined space amplifying the acrid scent of sweat and spilled liquor clinging to their clothes. Emerging into the alley's embrace, rain now a steady curtain that slicked the cobblestones and blurred the neon reflections into impressionistic smears. Lena hot-wired the sedan with a deft twist of wires under the dash, a relic skill from evasion drills in Eastern European safehouses, while Grant bundled Jax into the back seat, the fixer's face ashen against the leather. Tires screeched as they peeled away, the pursuing SUV materializing from the gloom like a specter, its high beams lancing through the downpour as it gave chase, weaving through traffic with predatory grace. The pursuit unfolded as a high-stakes ballet through the city's nocturnal arteries. Lena's maneuvers a masterclass in urban evasion, cutting sharp turns into one-way alleys that forced the SUV to fishtail on the wet asphalt, its grille clipping a row of trash bins in a symphony of clanging metal and scattering debris. Grant twisted in his seat, peering through the rear wiper's frantic arcs, his pulse a thunder in his ears as the vehicle's taillights loomed closer, a promise of collision. "They're gaining, can't we lose them in traffic?" he urged, but Lena's focus was laser-sharp, her hands steady on the wheel as she radioed a quick burst to a contact from her old network, a freelance spotter who fed real-time gridlock data via a burner app. "Hold on," she warned, veering into a construction detour where orange cones funneled lanes into a bottleneck, the SUV ramming through barriers in a spray of sparks that lit the rain like fleeting comets. Jax, wedged in the back, clutched the seat's edge, his voice a ragged whisper. Hale's cleaners, they don't stop. You two just painted targets on your backs bigger than his ego. The chase crested at a red light swarm near the Holland Tunnel's approach, horns blaring in protest as Lena gunned through a yellow, the SUV mirroring with aggressive abandon, its side mirror shearing off against a delivery van in a screech of rending steel. In a final gambit, Lena swerved into an underground garage ramp, the sedan's undercarriage scraping concrete as she descended into the multi-level maze, lights off to blend with parked hulks while the pursuers overshot their brakes, locking in futile pursuit. Minutes stretched like taffy in the humid confines, engines cooling to silence before Lena crept out a service exit, merging seamlessly into the flow toward a derelict warehouse on the waterfront, a bolt hole she maintained from CIA days, its rusted doors yielding to a hidden keypad sequence. Inside the cavernous space, lit by the skeletal glow of sodium lamps filtering through cracked panes, they collapsed against crates stamped with faded import seals, the adrenaline crash leaving them breathless and raw. Jack slumped against a pallet, nursing a bruised rib from the lounge scuffle, while Grant paced the concrete expanse, his hoodie damp and clinging like a second skin. That was insane, he admitted, running a hand through disheveled hair, the CEO's polish eroded by the night's unscripted grit. I thought boardroom battles were cutthroat. This is something else. Lena leaned against a support beam, her jacket unzipped to reveal the holstered multi-tool, now serving as sidearm, her expression a blend of satisfaction and vigilance as she replayed the escape in her mind's tactical overlay. Welcome to the real cutthroat, Mr. Grant. Hale's not just laundering cash. Those files Jack's glimpsed? They're veils over something uglier: networks, moving people like parcels, funding ops that make your algorithms look benevolent. Jax nodded wearily, pulling a flask from his inner pocket and passing it around. The whiskey's bite cut through the chill, loosening tongues as the warehouse's echoes amplified their confessions. Hale's gallery in Midtown is the nerve center, he elaborated, his fixer facade cracking to reveal the weariness of a man who had danced too close to too many flames. Auctions where a lost Rembrandt fetches premiums that bankroll shipments to ports in Greece or Morocco. Women, kids, funneled through false manifests. Your old pals got cartel ties now, and cops who look the other way for envelopes fat with untraceable crypto. Grant stopped pacing, sinking onto a crate with the gravity of dawning complicity, his mind flashing to board meetings where Hale's name had surfaced in passing. That old contact could open doors in Europe, oversights now blooming into indictments. I should have cut ties cleaner, he murmured, the admission a quiet unraveling of the myth he had built around his rise. Back when we split, it was over a deal in Shanghai ethical gray zones I walked away from, but maybe not far enough. If my company's tangled in this, Lena crossed to him, her presence a steadying force amid the warehouse's drafts, crouching to meet his gaze at eye level, her voice threading empathy with resolve. No one's spotless in this game. Elias, not me, not you. The agency? They hung Marcus out to dry for plausible deniability, left me with commendations that felt like condolences. I walked because trust became a luxury I couldn't afford, but here I am, building it brick by fragile brick with a man I barely know. That's the choice, wallow or wield it. For the first time, she used his given name, a bridge across the chasm of their worlds, and Grant absorbed it, the vulnerability in her eyes mirroring his own uncharted terrain. He reached out, clasping her forearm where the scar lay hidden, a silent acknowledgement of shared scars, visible and veiled. Then we wheeled it together. No more half measures. As the night deepened, Jack sketching a rough map of Hale's Midtown stronghold on a salvaged notepad, entry points, guard rotations gleaned from insider whispers. They forged the rudiments of a counteroffensive, leveraging Riley, Lena's hacker ally from Langley alumni circles, to probe Hale's digital flanks, tapping Grant's dormant venture contacts for discreet funding trails, and positioning Jax as a reluctant conduit to a gallery insider named Sophia, a curator whose conscience had begun to chafe under Hale's escalating demands. The warehouse became their provisional war room, blueprints unrolling across the floor amid flickering lantern light, conversations weaving between tactical dry runs and personal detours, Grant recounting Bronx boyhoods bartering comics for tech manuals, Lena sharing Marcus's penchant for terrible puns during stakeouts that had kept them sane in hostile territories. Dawn crept in through the high clerestory windows, gilding the dust motes in golden shafts as they dispersed. Jax melting into the morning fog with a vow to surface Sophia by dusk. Grant and Lena retreating to a safe house in Chelsea, its anonymous facade a bomb after the night's frenzy. In the quiet drive, with the city awakening to honking deliveries and steaming coffee carts, Grant broke the companionable silence. "You didn't have to pull me into this chaos, Lena. You could have handed the drive to the feds and vanished." She glanced at him, the skyline spires framing her profile like a silhouette of determination. "Maybe. But vanishing's what I did after Marcus hid in plain sight, polishing silver while the world spun on. This? It's unfinished business. For him, for the one still caught in the web. And you. You're not the villain in your own story, Elias. Not yet." He smiled faintly, the first genuine one since the gala's rupture, as they pulled into the safe house's gated drive, the rain's patter yielding to tentative Sunday. Hale's web quivered under their probing, threads loosening with each revelation, but the fixer knew shadows fought hardest when cornered. As Lena keyed the lock, her hand brushing Grant's in the threshold's intimacy, she felt the alliance solidify not as employer and asset, but as co-conspirators in a symphony of reclamation where trust, once fractured, could mend into something unbreakable. The city beyond hummed with oblivious vigor, its arteries pulsing with secrets yet to surface, and in that hidden enclave, the blueprint for Hale's undoing took shape, a mosaic of intellect, instinct, and the quiet fire of redemption that burned brighter in the face of encroaching dusk. The fog clung to midtown Manhattan like a conspirator's shroud, muting the skyscraper's defiant gleam into ethereal silhouettes as Lena Hayes perched on the rooftop ledge of a nondescript parking garage, her silhouette etched against the sodium vapor haze of sodium street lamps below. 3 days had etched themselves into her bones since the frenetic escape from Club Eclipse. Each hour, a meticulous weave of reconnaissance and reluctant alliances that transformed the warehouse's hasty sketches into a blueprint for confrontation. A surgical incursion into Victor Hale's Midtown Gallery, the gilded nerve center where abstract canvases concealed server banks humming with the empire's digital pulse. The air carried the briny tang of the East River mingled with exhaust from idling cabs far below, a sensory cocktail that grounded Lena as she adjusted the comms earpiece, its wire coiling like a lifeline down her collar. Beside her, Elias Grant, transformed from reluctant novice to resolute co-strategist, crouched with the focus of a man who had traded algorithms for action, his parka zipped against the autumn chill, a compact tablet in hand displaying Riley's live feed, thermal overlays of the gallery's perimeter, guard rotations ticking like a doomsday clock. "Riley's greenlit the breach window cameras looping in T-2, Grant murmured, his voice steady despite the faint tremor in his fingers, a vestige of the shoulder wound that still ached under fresh bandages from their last skirmish. Lena nodded, her breath fogging briefly in the crisp air, her mind a tactical lattice overlaying the rooftop vista with phantom vectors. Entry via the service balcony, exfiltration through the loading dock, contingencies for civilian spillover in the adjacent plaza where late-night joggers and dog-walkers unwittingly orbited Hale's fortress of facades. Riley Voss, no relation to Shadow's past, but a wiry operative from Lena's Langley cohort, now a freelance digital phantom with neon-streaked hair, and a laptop scarred from global hotspots chimed in via the secure channel, her voice a crisp underscore to the city's nocturnal hum. "Perimeter's yours for 8 minutes. I've ghosted the motion sensors. But Hale's got redundancies. Panic rooms wired to off-site alerts. Get in, snag the core drive, and ghost before his cavalry rides in." At 29, Riley embodied the agency's younger vanguard, her expertise in quantum-encrypted backdoors a far cry from Lena's analog grit, yet their reunion over encrypted video calls had bridged the years with the ease of shared scars. Riley's from a botched hack in Tallinn that cost her a mentor, Lena's from Bogota's unyielding rain. "We've looped in Sophia, too," Riley added, referencing the curator Jax had surfaced, a poised woman in her 40s whose whispered dossiers from Hale's inner sanctum had mapped the gallery's underbelly, hidden vaults behind klimt facsimiles, server farms cooled by artisanal wine cellars. Sophia waited in a nondescript sedan 2 blocks east, her role as inside guide a redemption arc from complicit silence to active defiance. Her conscience ignited by the USB fragments, Jax had smuggled her fragments that detailed not just ledgers, but lives. Manifests coded as sculpture consignments, veiling the transit of displaced families across Mediterranean routes. funds that oiled the gears of syndicates preying on the displaced. Lena clipped into the rappel line, her gloves gripping the carabiner with the assurance of muscle memory forged in Andean cliffs and urban spires, Grant mirroring her descent with the awkward proficiency of a quick-study mentee. They touched down on the gallery's second-floor balcony, a wrought-iron perch overlooking a courtyard fountain that murmured obliviously below. Slipping through French doors Riley had virtually unlatched, the latch's soft click swallowed by the distant wail of a passing ferry. The interior unfolded as a paradox of elegance and edge. Polished oak floors gleamed under recessed halogens, walls adorned with Rothko, inspired abstracts that whispered of existential voids. Yet Lena's trained eye pierced the veneer subtle camera housings camouflaged as sconces, pressure plates beneath select rugs that could summon silent alarms. They moved in tandem, Lena's boots whispering across the parquet while Grant shadowed with tablet in low ready, its screen a dim oracle feeding Riley's overrides in real time. Vaults at the end of the east wing, Sophia's disabling the biometrics. Lena breathed into her mic, her pulse a even metronome as they ghosted past a vitrine of Fabergé replicas, each bauble a potential blind for concealed mics. The air hummed with the faint ozone of HVAC systems masking server whirs, a mechanical heartbeat underscoring the gallery's facade as a cultural cloister. To the public, it was Hale's crown jewel, hosting soirees where oligarchs bid millions on rediscovered masters, but beneath, it pulsed with the illicit rhythm of encrypted auctions, virtual bazaars where digital tokens masked human itineraries, fortunes laundered through pixelated provenance. Sophia met them at the vault's antechamber, her tailored shift dress rumpled from hours of feigned inventory checks, her face a map of quiet resolve etched with the fine lines of suppressed outrage. This way, Hale's in his office upstairs, prepping for a dawn flight to Zurich, she whispered, her keycard swiping a panel that parted concealed doors with a hydraulic sigh, revealing a sub-level corridor lined with cooling vents and humming racks. The trio descended a spiral stairwell, the air cooling to a sterile chill that raised gooseflesh on Grant's arms, his breath visible in the dim emergency strips guiding their path. He's paranoid since Eclipse doubled the night watch, but they're rote. Patrols every 15, no overlaps. Sophia continued, her voice a thread of continuity from Jax's intel, her hands trembling slightly as she punched an override code into a secondary console, the vault's iris scanner bypassing with a compliant beep. Inside, the chamber sprawled like a digital cathedral, floor-to-ceiling servers glowing with Azure LEDs, air recyclers whispering against the low drone of cooling fans, a central pedestal housing Hale's master, drive a sleek obelisk of encrypted alloy that held the syndicate's unvarnished ledger. Grant slotted Riley's extraction rig into the port, the device a bespoke quantum skimmer initiating a silent siphon, progress bars crawling across his tablet like veins filling with contraband truth, transaction webs linking Hale's auctions to cartel drop points in Tangier, beneficiary lists naming shell NGOs that funneled aid into trafficking pipelines, even cross-references to Grant Ventures' dormant accounts harmless at first glance, but damning in aggregate, a mosaic of inadvertent complicity that twisted like a knife in his gut. The breach's serenity shattered with the subtlety of a fracture line. A distant chime from the main floor. Riley's voice crackling urgently. Tamper alert. Someone tripped a ghost sensor. Hale's goons inbound. 6 tangos. Armed and converging. Footfalls thundered upward from the loading docks. A seismic wave of tactical boots and barked coordinates filtering through the vents. The gallery's cultural hush yielding to the clamor of intrusion. Lena unholstered her suppressed sidearm, a compact 9mm with ergonomic grip tailored to her palm, positioning herself at the vault's threshold. Sophia retreating to a maintenance alcove with whispered instructions to bar the secondary hatch. Grant hovered by the drive, his extraction at 62%, sweat beading on his brow as the first shouts echoed closer. Lock it down, intruders in the sublevel. The enforcers breached the stairwell in a wedge formation, shadows lengthening under the stairs' underglow, their tack vests bulging with concealed plates, hands cradling submachine guns that swept the corridor with lethal arcs. Lena fired first, a measured double tap that felled the pointman with precise center mass hits, his body crumpling against the railing in a muffled thud that echoed like a dropped tome in a library of lies. The response was immediate. A fusillade stitching the walls with divots and ricochets that sang off metal conduits, forcing Lena into a tactical role behind a server bank whose fans whirred obliviously, shielding her as Grant yanked the drive free at 78%, stuffing it into a shielded pouch with hands slick from tension. Sophia emerged from cover with a fire axe scavenged from the wall mount, swinging it in a wide arc that caught the second enforcer's rifle barrel. The impact jarring sparks as she channeled years of pent-up gallery drudgery into defiant force, the man staggering back with a grunt. Grant, adrenaline overriding caution, seized a loose conduit pipe from the floor, wielding it like an extension of his resolve to swing at the third, the clang reverberating through the chamber as metal met vest, staggering the assailant long enough for Lena to line up a disabling shot to his thigh. The vault devolved into a maelstrom of confined fury, enforcers adapting with flashbangs that bloomed blinding blooms of phosphor, their concussive waves rattling Lena's teeth as she blinked through the afterimage, her training kicking in with compartmentalized calm breathe. Assess. Neutralize. She countered with a thrown extinguisher that erupted in a choking blizzard, buying seconds for the trio to regroup at the stairwell's base. Sophia's axe now a barrier against probing muzzles, while Grant covered with suppressive bursts from a commandeered pistol, his shots wild but willful, each pull of the trigger a repudiation of the bystander he had been. Stairs up and out, Lena commanded, her voice a clarion amid the din, propelling them upward in a staggered bound. The enforcers pursued a relentless tide, crashing against the gallery's upper galleries, paintings shuddering on hooks, spotlights flickering as stray rounds grazed wiring. The climax crested in Hale's sanctum, a penthouse area overlooking the Hudson's inky expanse, where floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city's indifferent sprawl like a diorama of conquests. Victor Hale stood at the threshold as they burst through the oak-paneled doors, his silhouette backlit by the river's reflected lights, a tumbler of cognac in one hand and a pearl-handled revolver in the other, elegant lethality incarnate. His 50s etched with the patina of unchallenged dominion, a scar tracing his jaw from a long-ago Buenos Aires negotiation gone verbal. "Lena Hayes," he drawled, his tone a velvet noose laced with recognition, eyes flicking from her poised stance to Grant's heaving form, Sophia's axe lowered but ready. "The agency's lost lamb, returned to the fold with my old associate in tow. Predictable, almost poetic, using gala glitter to mask your grubby probes." The revolver tracked them lazily, but Lena held her ground, sidearm leveled at his center mass, the drive's pouch secure against her hip like a talisman of impending revelation. Poetics, the auctions where you peddle masterpieces to fund misery. Victor drives full of manifests that treat lives like line items. Your web's unraveling. This ends with you in cuffs, not cognac. Hale's laugh was a low rumble, stepping aside to reveal a wall of monitors cycling auction feeds and encrypted streams, his free hand gesturing expansively. Ends? Empires like mine don't end, they evolve. Grant here knows that. We built on the same sands deals that danced ethics edge because purity starves innovation. But you, Hayes, you're the zealot, haunted by ghosts that weren't your fault. Marcus Hale, no kin of mine, but fate's cruel jest died because the world choose idealists. Join me, or watch your little crusade crumble under headlines of rogue operatives' vendetta. Grant stepped forward, his voice cracking the tension like frost on glass, the tablet clutched as both shield and sword. "It's over, Victor. The drives copied every transfer, every shell, every soul you commodified. I turned a blind eye once. No more. This isn't vengeance, it's accountability, the kind we both evaded while chasing zeros." Hale's composure fractured, the revolver snapping up, but Sophia lunged with a cry that channeled suppressed galleries of silence, her axe half deflecting the shot into the ceiling where it showered plaster like confetti of defeat. Lena capitalized in the instant's chaos, closing the distance with a disarm that twisted Hale's wrist in a lock honed from countless interrogations, the revolver clattering to the Persian rug as she pinned him against the window, the Hudson's lights blurring into a kaleidoscope behind his snarling visage. "Yield," she commanded, her knee pressing into his spine, the fight draining from him like ink in water as Riley's remote lockdown engaged gallery doors sealing, enforcers rerouted by false alarms to phantom breaches. Grant activated the tablet's broadcast module, a prepped link to Sophia's journalist contact at a major network, the drive's payload uploading in a torrent that flooded secure channels, dossiers, manifests, audio snippets of Hale's own voice, brokering consignments that masked human odysseys from despair to deliverance's denial. As Dawn's tentative fingers pried at the horizon, painting the skyline in strokes of rose and amber, the gallery's facade cracked under the weight of inevitability, sirens converging like threads in a noose, federal vans screeching to halts in the plaza below. Agents in windbreakers swarming with warrants waved like banners of belated justice. Hale, cuffed and defiant in the custody of a tactical team Sophia had anonymously tipped, spat venomous predictions of appeals and alibis, but his empire's scaffolding buckled in real-time, stock tickers plummeting for implicated galleries, headlines erupting across feeds. Tech Titan's ex-partner, exposed in global laundering ring human cargo scandal rocks art world. Lena watched from the penthouse balcony as the arrests cascaded, her breath sinking with the river's lap, the drive's duplicate secured in a diplomatic pouch for international handover. Grant joined her, his shoulder bandaged anew but his posture unbowed, the night's toll etched in faint bruises but forged in newfound clarity. "We did it," he said softly, the words a quiet triumph over the chaos they had navigated. Not just Hale, the whole rotten lattice, but the real win? Those manifests. They're leads now, trails to pull more from the shadows. The revelation rippled outward like a stone in still water, amplifying through digital veins to global shores. By midday, viral clips bodycam feeds Sophia had smuggled, overlaid with drive excerpts dominated timelines. Hashtags like #Art of Justice and #Unveil the Veil trending from Tokyo boardrooms to Nairobi cafes. Survivors' testimonies threading into the narrative like voices long muted. Network anchors dissected the fallout in breathless segments, cross-cutting to Grant's impromptu presser from the safe house rooftop, his confession a masterclass in accountable vulnerability. "I built on borrowed ground, overlooked cracks that became chasms." Lena Hayes didn't just expose Victor Hale, she illuminated the blind spots we all harbor. Her courage demands we rebuild, not with algorithms, but with oversight that safeguards the overlooked. Applause thundered through the feed, a chorus echoing the plaza's earlier cheers as Lena, flanked by Riley and Sophia, emerged to brief the press not as a spectral operative, but as an architect of awakening, her words measured yet resonant. "This isn't about one gallery or one grudge. It's about the lives ledgered away in luxury's margins, Marcus, the families in those manifests, the countless who vanish into voids we fund with indifference. We pulled the curtain. Now we hold it open, for scrutiny, for change." In the weeks that followed, the blaze of exposure kindled enduring flames. Congressional hearings subpoenaed Hale's ledgers, birthing bipartisan bills mandating blockchain audits for art provenance and NGO transparency, their clauses a bulwark against the syndicate's serpentine returns. Grant Ventures pivoted, channeling a foundation's billions into ethical tech algorithms, detecting laundering patterns, platforms amplifying survivor voices in real-time translations that bridged borders. Lena, rechristened in op-eds as the Veilbreaker, declined corporate thrones for a nonprofit helm. The Hayes Initiative, a global consortium partnering with Riley's cyber cohorts and Sophia's curatorial networks to map and dismantle trafficking webs. Its charter etched with Marcus's ethos. "For the ones who can't, we must." She stood at its inaugural gala not as help, but as honoree in a sunlit atrium where abstracts now evoked resilience, not ruse. Grant at her side as donor and friend, their toast a quiet vow amid toasts. To unfinished business, finished right. As twilight draped the city in velvet folds, Lena lingered on a balcony overlooking the same Hudson that had witnessed Hale's hubris. The scar on her arm a faint tracery under the breeze, Marcus's whisper no longer a specter but a spark in the constellation of causes she now stewarded. The world, scarred but stirring, had shifted not through solitary strikes, but symphonies of solidarity, where one woman's composure and chaos ignited a global reckoning, proving that justice, like light through fog, endures when kindled by the unyielding will to illuminate the dark. And in that enduring glow, hope once a fragile ember blazed as the true inheritance of those who dared to unveil.